Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the episodes or viewing the episodes or listening to the episodes of the Silk Stocking Sisters. And this is about our 10th episode, which I figured I'd take a break, not have any specific guests. It's the time that I need to reflect and see where we are at this point, and to make sure that we are able to keep moving the agenda on the topics and the goals for this particular podcast. And let me just go back and refresh your memory in terms of what I set out as the goals for this podcast. And if they're not met, you let me know. The goal of the podcast, as I said initially, was to share stories and experiences with historical, experiences, both historical and current, related to school integration, desegregation, busing in the North. And this included psychological, legal, and social, economic, racial, and ethnic issues. So hopefully we've addressed some of those. We're not finished, but we addressed some of those. And hopefully you can continue to hang out here with me as we continue to share other stories moving forward. But I thought I'd take this pause and just me and you talking about the podcast and what we've accomplished so far. So, as I said to you, this podcast is really an extension of my book, Desegregation of New York City Schools, A Story of the Silk Stocking Sisters. So if you haven't read it, check it out. It's an academic book, so it's probably available in many libraries around the country, particular universities and colleges around the country and around the world. So those of you who are checking in from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, check your country libraries and check online, do WorldCat and check it out and see where you can find the text. If not, you can purchase it. It should still pretty much be available on Amazon, and you should be able to purchase the book at this point. So let's go back and look at what we talked about so far at this point. So the initial episode was a very brief coverage of just introducing to the podcast and talking about the book specifically in terms of what led me to write the book. And also the fact that the topics within the book are being used now to lead us into conversations in this particular podcast. I have been joined by significant guests. They're all special from episode 2 up until most recently, the last episode, and that's going to continue to occur. I do plan to do more individual podcasts with topics I want to talk about specifically and not necessarily have a guest with me each episode, but there's so many people who I'd like to include in this journey with me who have so much to share, both personally, professionally, that will provide the information we need to know, share the histories, experiences of real life situations. This is not a fiction, this is a fact. So I think that that's what my priority is letting people know what's going on. And I go back to this because I recall when I first spoke about my books, when the early part of when I started speaking about my book, there was an actual student who said to me that she did not know that schools were segregated in the North. I was shocked. And this is a person who wanted to be a teacher, which I was really, really amazed. The fact that this person wanted to be a teacher and did not know in 1920, that did not know that schools were segregated in the northern part of the United States. So I went on this journey to think about ways in which I can educate people, share things with people, so other people who've been through similar or like-minded kinds of experiences can share their experiences about their school experiences outside of the South. Of course, everybody remembers the Little Rock Nine, as I mentioned before, and all that took place in the South, the southern states. But hardly anyone knows about the experience that took place in the North. And I did have a speaker. Let's go back and talk about some of the people who spoke. And then I'll tell you how it kind of all leads up to where we are at this point and what's going to help me to direct the podcast moving forward. So the first episode, as I said before, was an introduction. The second episode and the third episode were classmates of mine, people who attended PS6 along the time with me when I, quote unquote, desegregated PS6. At this point, I just want to say that the first episode included Naja Radcliffe, Betsy Quint Feldman, Jeffrey Levy, Ronald Coleman, Amy Opperman, Cash, and Anthony, known as Tony Stern. Whereas the next episode with the classmates included Naja Radcliffe, Betsy Quint Feldman, Jeffrey Levy, Ronald Coleman, Amy Opperman Cash, Anthony, otherwise known as Tony Stern, Pamela Proctor, and author, I think Larry Brown, and author. So it was really engaging conversations by everyone who participated in both the episodes, which shed light on our experiences based upon what I talked about in the book and whether or not they could relate to some of the things that I mentioned in the book and maybe have different viewpoints about it. So that was something that was discussed in episodes 2 and 3 with my PS6 classmates. We were a diverse group of people, as you can find out, as you heard, and we bring different insights and different perspectives and different experiences of what was happening during that era, during that time frame. And that would be something that's important to talk about. And of course, there were two of us Silk Stocking sisters who were participating in the podcast. And I'm sure you know by now which two there are, but there were two of us. So hopefully you can find that and then send me an email saying, I know which two there were. So just let me know if you figure that out. That would be something to talk about in future episodes. And maybe I can find another Silk Stocking sister who wants to participate. We'll see. But that was so important also. But as I said before, these are all topics related to what was happening inside the desegregation process for myself and the other Silk Stocking sisters during this era. So that was very interesting dialogue with my classmates, fellow classmates from PS6, and what their life has been like then and since then, which was interesting. So then the episode 4, I decided to start bringing out someone else who had been through a busing experience. And that was really interesting. Professor Anthony Turner of Wagner College, he's a music professor. And his experiences of busing in Des Moines, Iowa was really surprising. So I'm looking at the Midwest, I'm looking at the North and saying, okay, these are really interesting experiences. And they're the insight that Professor Anthony shared with the audience about what he experienced and what happened and how this all came about, which led him pretty much to be doing what he's doing, apparently. So a lot of the discussion, it was about people's experiences, the historical perspective, what the families were like. So it's more encompassing as opposed to just cut and dry. So you bring the humanity into the discussions, which I thought was really illuminated throughout all the discussions with people who were part of any experience of desegregation or integration or busing. The next episode was Dr. Patricia Morris Carey, whom I had known for years, not knowing that she was part of the integration of Chicago public schools. Go figure. So that's why you never know about people. And I've known Patricia Carey for, I should say, close to 30 years. Yeah, close to 30 years. And never knew, it was just a chance coincidence that a mutual friend shared with me, hey, I think Dr. Patricia Carey, she was part of the Chicago public schools integration. Lo and behold, that's what happened. So that discussion was very, it was surprising, but it was a wonderful, interesting to know that I had someone I knew personally who was part of the beginning or the first insights to integrating Chicago public schools. I think it was in Hyde Park section of Chicago, matter of fact. But it wasn't busing, but she was in a neighborhood school, but it was integrated, became more integrated during the time that she attended school. So that was why it was not everything's busing. like I said in my book, I wasn't bused on a yellow school bus to PS6. I took the New York City public school bus, public transportation, like many other students who live a little distance from their schools. So it wasn't like I was on a yellow bus going to schools. So that was interesting to know that he was another situation in the city of Chicago, that someone was actually experiencing integration without having to be bused at all, because her neighborhood schools were converted to an integrated environment. The next episode was with Mr. Justin Murphy, who's an educational journalist and author. And he wrote the book, Your Children Are Greatly in Danger, School Segregation in Rochester, New York. And Mr. Justin Murphy, like I said before, he shared stories about what happened, a very excellent historical piece of the Rochester City Schools. As I said, Mr. Murphy talked extensively about the experiences, the people, the places, the children, and the experiences that took place in the city of Rochester, which is a place where I spent 10 years of my life attending undergraduate and graduate school, which was really amazing. And I understood, I didn't realize that that was taking place or had taken place prior to my attending college. And also during the time I was attending college, what was taking place in Rochester Public Schools. But I was just glad that he shared this information. So I wanted to share with my audience, and I wanted to learn more about it. So it wasn't just a guest speaker, it was also someone who was educating me about what was taking place in Rochester. Because like I said, I spent 10 years of my life there. And I was in fact involved in the Rochester City Schools at some point. Because of my training at the University of Rochester, I also served as an intern at the Rochester, in the Rochester City Schools. So it was just interesting that I didn't know the histories that were taking place as I was participating in the Rochester public school experience. But it was fascinating. But he did an excellent job researching and writing about it. Of course, he's an excellent writer, but I'm just saying it was very thorough. And it says a lot because he did not actually experience any segregation, he tended, I think, service suburban schools. He mentioned in his interview, which was a different experience, but he knew about it. But he now lives in Rochester area, so and has young children who he's concerned about the school systems. But also he talks extensively about how it impacts the students who don't participate in having still children going to schools that they know other people from different ethnic and racial backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses. So I just wanted to mention that about Mr. Murphy's episode. So definitely check out, the episode should be available. Still, you can go back and search and see and watch it if you haven't watched it. If you weren't able to watch it during the time that it was posted, you can go back and look at it now if possible. The next person we had was Judge John Carter, who's a retired state criminal court justice, and he is the son of the late Robert L. Carter, who argued on behalf of Oliver Brown that led to the Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision. And Judge Carter did an excellent job of explaining to us some of the legal aspects of segregation and desegregation and some of the legal issues that related to that, which kind of led to the Brown decision. And I think that he also shared about his own personal experiences of attending public schools in New York City. And because his parents decided that school wasn't the best situation for him, he ended up leaving that public school and attending a private school. And he still had a good experience in that school as well. But it does say a lot about what was happening and how even parents, every parent wants the best education for their child. And in this situation, for Judge Carter, it was no different. And I think he explains that very explicitly in his episode about the importance of having an excellent education. And of course, it led to him becoming an attorney. I'm sure I'm just sure, I talked about his ability to connect with future opportunities, and I believe he pretty much follows his father's footsteps in terms of becoming an attorney and also a judge. So these are things that people need to know about that they don't necessarily know about and understand from people's individual experiences of what difference it can make in having a quality education that can lead to a different outcome, given that you have support also from family and friends. And that was something that I discussed in my book about having family and friends and community that supports you as you pursue excellent education. The next episode was with Mr. Peter Thompson. Mr. Peter Thompson is an award-winning journalist and author of the book Sacred Seed, A Journey to Lake Baikal. And he was someone who I found online. Interesting. It was an excellent article I read about his experience of school busing in Boston, Massachusetts. And that experience was very unique because it was only a one-year thing based upon his article. And in an interview, you'll hear when he talks about in his episode, the episode he talks about how there were children who were bused from Boston out to the suburban area where he lived and when he was attending school. And then half the year they would reverse and they would switch. And then he and his friends from that suburban area would then go to the Boston schools for the other half of the year. Now that was an experiment in itself. You had teachers who were involved, diverse teachers were involved, diverse candidates who were involved, but they only lasted 1 year. It didn't return. So it didn't last more than 1 year. It was a good experiment. But what was interesting about what Peter Thompson did, he connected with some classmates who were part of that experience and found them and wrote an article about that in a local piece about them pretty recently, which is what resonated with me. I'm like, oh, this is similar to what I did. So just like I found and interviewed the Silk Stocking sisters about their experiences attending PS6, Mr. Thompson then also wrote an article. He connected with them, what they were doing, and talked about their experiences and how the experience was through that 1 year experience of busing between outside of Boston and inside of Boston. So it was a very interesting article, and it was very interesting hearing Mr. Thompson talk about what many of the young people who he connected with later on in life said about that experience. And so that would be something that you all should check out. If you haven't seen the podcast episode, check it out. And it could say a lot about humanity. It says a lot about learning and growing. It says a lot about believing in each other. And says a lot about perseverance. And so I think that in itself says a lot about what can happen in any situation with young people. Mind you, his situation was in junior high school, I believe. It wasn't elementary school. And so it makes it not as challenging, but still at the same time, this was a tough time in Boston. And so therefore, the fact that these young people were participating in this type of situation speaks volumes about about them and their parents. So here you go again, parents, because it was like they volunteered themselves to do this. Parents had to be asked and be willing to support this particular quote unquote experiment. And several of the parents did, otherwise it wouldn't have occurred. But then again, after the first year, parents, specifically, I think he mentioned in the suburban area, decided it wasn't the best offer for them, and they decided not to participate moving forward. So therefore, they didn't continue that particular process. But I think going back, meeting with the former friends that he found was really going full circle for him. And I understand that process completely, because I think it was helpful for me to reconnect with some of my classmates. How many years later? I'm not going to say how long, but it was a long time ago that I participated in the PS6 quote unquote experiment. And I called it experiment because it wasn't just about integrating or desegregating PS6. It was about helping PS6 to continue to sustain itself in terms of their enrollments. The enrollments were low. They had plenty of seats because many of the parents who had small children in that area, many of them were leaving the area and moving to the suburbs. And so therefore, they took their children with them. And so that population of early third, fourth, fifth, those children were now leaving, or they were actually sending their children to private schools. So here we come, the few of us who come into PS6 outside of our districts, and we basically kind of fill the spot, but they wanted to make sure we were going to be able to not be too much out of sync with some of the students in terms of academics coming into PS6. So that was the difference for me. So the last person that was part of the episode, the last episode that you probably heard before was the one with Miss Laura Meckler. Miss Laura Meckler is a national education writer for the Washington Post and author of the book Dream Town, Shaker Heights and the Quest for Racial Equity. I had a wonderful interview with her. It was a wonderful discussion, and this was Shaker Heights. If you don't know where Shaker Heights is, look on the map, folks. And it's outside. It's right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. So it's in Ohio, state of Ohio, another northern state, Midwestern state, if you want to call it Midwestern state. But it's also an excellent. We had an excellent discussion about the quality of schools, which Shaker Heights is known for its high quality of schools. And people want to move in the area, but mind you, they decided to allow people outside who were not necessarily white people, quote unquote, to move into the Shaker. You had to be in Shaker Heights to attend the schools. So that story she talks about, and I like the fact that she wrote about excellent writing, of course, stellar writing, but the fact, in fact, how she designed her writing, her book, was also something that I related to, because she told the story from the point of view of individuals who were part of the situation, who were part of the Shaker Heights school situation. And she brought in research, but she talked about individual people, and each chapter has the name of the person and their experiences. And I guess some of the people who may have passed away, she might have gotten relatives who were related to them or knew of the situation. And then, of course, she did her fantastic research, which is probably premier, and that's what we all do when we do that. Write a book, we do research, folks. So if you're going to write a book, research. But she did an excellent job with that, and I really like the flow of talking about the individuals and their perspectives of that situation in Shaker Heights and how they fit into that situation of either the parents, and there's a lot of parenting issues in there. So it goes a lot about the parents, and it talks about the socioeconomic status of some of the first people of color who actually were able to move into Shaker Heights, what happens with the real estate situation, which talks about the, I guess you said, redlining of communities and what happens and how certain people aren't able to purchase houses or homes in areas that if you're a person of color, that's another piece that came up in this particular book, which I found very, very interesting, because of course we kind of know by now that much of what we talk about, neighborhood schools, yeah, but if your neighborhood doesn't have the same kind of people in it, who do you think is going to go attend the school? And so that speaks a lot about what has happened. And many schools were where people lived in the neighborhood. So if you were a person who was if you were a Puerto Rican and most of the people around you were Puerto Rican, it's going to be all Puerto Ricans in the school. And so it's only when you would leave, or if somebody else were to come in. So you wanted to go in neighborhood schools were where people who are alike live in the same neighborhood. So there was racial segregation within communities, and pretty much is still the case today. So we'll talk more about this topic moving forward. For the next couple of episodes, I want to talk about the current resegregation, quote unquote, of public schools in the United States, specifically in the North and Midwest. And we'll talk more about, hopefully bring more legal analysts about, and we'll talk more about what hasn't been touched yet significantly, is the psychological aspects of the experiences that young people have, or even people who aren't doing it in elementary school, who are doing it in high school or junior high school or middle school, as we call it now. What kind of psychological implications that have on a person, both those who are coming in and for those who are already there. How does that impact them psychologically? I could ask some of our former some of my former classmates, but I think I'm gonna try to bring some other people in, because there's a lot of us who've done very well with education and psychological stuff, but I'm gonna bring some other people in and talk about that. I mean, I can talk about that myself. It all depends. But I think one of the things I'm gonna do, I'm gonna probably provide a couple of episodes with just me talking about specific subjects and specific topics. And I'd like for you to reach out and contact me and email me, and let me know if there's a topic you'd like to have discussed, or if there are individuals that you'd like to have maybe on the podcast to hear about their perspectives. I could invite them and see if they're willing to attend, or maybe find someone who has similar perspectives, and see if they're willing to attend if I'm not able to get the individuals that you'd like to recommend. So that's what I'd like to do moving forward. But I wanted to take this episode just very briefly, just give a summary of where we've been so far, and to thank you for being with me on this journey, because it is a journey, as we move forward and hopefully enlighten people that we can do this. We can do this. I'd like to also bring in angles related to people who have not just turned out to become academics, but people who become, like I said, we have attorneys, we have psychologists, we have athletes, we have people from entrepreneurs, we have all types of people who've been through our educational system. And we'll see if, in fact, their education if there's a correlation between what their experiences were in terms of education, elementary, middle school, high school, that led them to become or pursue the profession that they're currently engaged in. So these are the kinds of things I'd like to talk about moving forward in the podcast. But then again, like I said, contact me and let me know what you think would be a topic of interest to you. I believe that I have my emails available. Look at silkstalkingsisters.com and send me something. Let me know what you have to say. So have a great day, a great evening, a great morning, a great night, and wherever you are around the world, around the country, around the state, around the city, have a great one. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye now.